Hello, my name's Travis West. I'm an assistant professor and extension educator for 4-H youth development, working for the Ohio State University Extension office in Vinton County. Today we want to talk about judging rabbits at the county fair and what will make that experience successful for you as the judge, as well as the youth members that are exhibiting that day. Some objectives we want to cover. Understand what are the pre-fair expectations we should have for the fair or show committee that's hiring us. We want to talk a little bit about what ethical conduct in the ring looks like for you as the judge. We also want to ensure that you provide a positive experience for the youth at the end of the day. We also want to explore articulating placings using a microphone. So what sorts of information do you need to be prepared to deliver to parents, advisors, and members once you get a chance to justify your placings over the microphone? And then we want to recognize that there are some differences based on the classes that you're judging and give a few tips for how you might prepare for each individual different class. Let's start with some pre-fair expectations. Prior to the show, you should expect to receive a confirmation in the form of a contract. That could be a written hard copy contract or an emailed contract. But that contract should list some very important things. Things like date, time that they expect you to arrive, as well as the time that the show starts, location, including address, fee, so that would be the fee that you're being compensated for judging that day that you've agreed to with the fair, and what classes you will be judging that day. It's always good to know what you're going to get into that day so that you can be prepared before you arrive at the fair. One other important information that you want to have, either in the form of a contract or provided from the show sponsor or the contact person that hired you, is a phone number where you can reach them should something happen, like traffic accidents, you get lost, you're running late, you can't find the location of the barn where you're supposed to be judging once you're on the fairground. So that contact information is very important during the week of the fair. What happens if I can't follow through with my contract? So something unexpected comes up. Depending on the timeliness of that, the closer you are to the fair, the more important it becomes for you to do some legwork and make that as easy as possible for the fair official. You should always secure, and I say secure, you should obtain a judge that is available during that date and time and will agree to the fee that you've agreed to. Pass that information on to the fair contact person. It's up to that fair contact person to agree to hire that person and contact them directly, or go back to the drawing board of a list of judges they might have had and hire a new judge if you're not able to keep up your end of the contract for judging the county fair rabbit show. Once we get to the show, what are our expectations? Expectations are that you're dressing appropriately or dressing the part as a judge. That might include an apron, a lab coat with long sleeves. It might include a shirt with a collar, but nice attire that's appropriate for judging rabbits. If you're handling rabbits, something with long sleeves or some arm guards to show that you're protecting your arms from rabbits. Those things that we would also expect 4-H and FFA members that are exhibiting rabbits to have when they're showing those animals. Understand that you're hired to deliver a service. So you've been hired as a contractor to judge their county fair rabbit show. You're utilizing that fair's rules, policies, and processes. Whether you agree with those or not, those are the rules, policies, and processes they set forward for judging their county's rabbit show. Here in Ohio, we have 88 counties, and I can tell you there are 88 sets of those. So every county is a little bit different. So it's important that you understand the judging process, how many placings you're going to have to give, how they go about choosing certain awards, and what animals are available for those awards. It's not up to you to determine whether the process that they use for judging their county fair rabbit show is a good one. I would also say it's not up to us as judges to give them our opinions about what's wrong with the rabbit show and how it runs unless, of course, we're asked. So sometimes at the conclusion of the rabbit show, the committee or the contact person might ask you if you have suggestions for improvement for next year. That's your time to deliver what is your opinion about how the day went, what things made sense, what things maybe didn't make sense, and what would make that show a better experience for the youth members. Who's in charge? So hopefully you have a contact person. That's probably the person that contacted you to hire you to judge the show. Once you've gotten to the fair, there may be a committee or a small group um, of individuals that are in charge. You may also be working with junior fair board members, so teens that have been empowered to work a certain show. All those people are involved. Hopefully they know the policies, the processes. Those are the people that you go to for clarification. But if you're unsure about who is to clarify a rule or an interpretation, make sure you know who that person is. I would also encourage you to make sure you're using whatever that fair provides as an identifier for kids. Now, I know every fair is a little bit different, and some of them do a better job of being able to identify kids. So things like back numbers, or maybe they give them stickers that have letters or numbers on them. So you're going to need some way to make sure that you can identify kids because you don't know their names. Now, the people working the show might know their names, but I think it's always smoother if there's a way for those fairs to have some sort of identifier so that if you decide number 622 is the first placed individual in that class, that you give them that number then means something to the person recording the places. A lot of times when I go to fairs, people will say, well, do you mean Johnny? And I'm like, I have no idea who Johnny is. I've never seen most of these kids before in my life, and so some way to identify them. I say that because there's nothing worse than somebody recording a placing, they announce it over the microphone, and then you realize as a judge, that's not the correct kid. So making sure that we're not providing the opportunity for some type of embarrassment or correction that needs made from the microphone or the announcer stand, just making sure that miscommunication doesn't happen between you and the person that you're working with in the ring that's recording your official placings to then announce. An example of how this goes wrong is that a judge stands with a microphone to give their placings and then uses their finger to point at a kid at a table maybe with 8 or 10 kids at it, and nobody was really sure who that person is pointing at. So always make sure that you're being conscientious about how you identify those members when you're recording your official placings with the show official. Conduct in the ring. So how do we conduct ourselves as a judge, somebody that's hired by the county fair, as somebody that's knowledgeable and capable of completing the task at hand, which is judging the county fair rabbit show? So handling and ethics, make sure that we're using properly handling techniques. These would be the techniques that you would expect out of a really seasoned showman. So somebody that handles the rabbit really well, or somebody really understands what are the proper ways for me to carry my rabbit, proper way to move my rabbit, proper way to flip my rabbit over. We would expect those are the same handling methods that you use. I know sometimes if we handle rabbits at home and we have rabbits in our barn, that we get a little lax sometimes in how we might handle them. So making sure that we're just conscientious about the methods that we're using are the methods that we would want those youth members to use also. And then ethical. So every fair hires you, assuming that you're an ethical person and that you're going to perform your duty in an ethical manner. And so what does that mean? Honest and open in your assessment of the member, whether you're judging showmanship, or the animal, whether you're judging breed, market, or pet classes, that you're open and honest in placing the animals as you see them. Avoid talking to parents and advisors before and during the show. So it's always happens when you go to a county fair that parents and advisors really want to know what you're saying to their kids. They also want to learn more a lot of times. And so they don't understand that talking to you in between classes or talking to you before the show starts doesn't really give the best image of your ethical behavior. I don't think they do it intentionally. It's just one of those things. They don't see any problem with talking to you before and in between classes. And so trying to avoid the opportunity for that to happen once the show is over. As a judge, I'm always open to questions, comments, talking with parents, advisors, and kids to um, allow them to further learn or to explain some things that might have happened during the show. And so sometimes you might go to a county fair and realize that you know people in the audience, or you know parents, or maybe even know kids because you're involved in the rabbit industry. You see them at shows, or you had some other encounter with them. Um, and that's going to happen. So my comment about my daughter's county fair show is I've been involved in rabbits in Ohio for over 30 years now. And so if somebody comes to judge our county fair where my daughter shows, and I don't know the judge, you probably don't want them judging because they probably don't know a whole lot about rabbits. And so I'm going to know most everybody that comes in the door, but we expect those people to be ethical and act appropriately as far as assessment. So I don't expect any preferential treatment. I expect them to place my daughter's rabbits um, just as if they would any other person's rabbits, and treat her with the same um, amount of questions when it comes to showmanship and the same stringent criteria for examination or presentation of the rabbit as they would with anybody else. Working with youth. So if you've had experience working with youth, whether that's through 4-H, FFA, maybe it's through your local church, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, some other organization, sometimes that can be a little challenging. So when we think about youth, there are really two kinds of youth. We could be working with junior fair board members. We covered that earlier. So those typically are teens that have been trained to take on a leadership role within the ring. That might be announcing placings, it might be recording placings, it might be lining up classes, and it might be making sure that the show is moving and the process for the show is being followed as it should be. Here we want to talk a little bit about the youth that are in the ring. So those youth you are interacting with throughout the day, whether that's through a showmanship experience or whether you're judging their rabbit, you're still interacting with youth. So I always like to keep in the back of my mind that for each youth I interact with, I want that experience to end on a positive note. And so what does that look like? In showmanship, for me, that looks like making sure that that individual that is answering questions about their rabbit and I'm quizzing them about their knowledge, that I've asked them a question or allowed them to sort of answer correctly something they've felt comfortable with as sort of the last thing that I asked them. So they go away from that experience thinking, oh, well, I answered 3 questions wrong, but I really nailed that question at the end. During breeding or market show, what does that look like? Again, I think it's the same sort of process. When I'm evaluating those rabbits, when I'm giving comments about what I like and dislike about that rabbit, whether it's a breed, market, or pet project, then I'm always ending with a couple comments that seem like these are good things that your rabbit has. And that's what those kids remember. Because we know when they go back to the stands, their parents are going to ask them, what did the judge say about your rabbit? And most likely the things they remember is the first thing and the last thing that you told them about that rabbit. They don't remember a lot about those things in the middle. What does it mean when we talk about contact with youth? So some youth lack some personal space, and so they might come up to you and hug you if they placed well in their class. When that happens, I always say hands up, so I kind of put my hands up. They hug me around the waist, but I don't hug them back. That's the safest way to tackle that situation. But really, no arms around the shoulders or hugs of kids within the show ring. So contact that is appropriate, high fives, handshakes, head nods, those things are all appropriate contact to acknowledge that they've done a good job or that you appreciate their information they've provided you. You appreciate them bringing their rabbit to the county fair and allowing you to evaluate that project. Justifying your decision. So once you've made your placings, A lot of times you'll be asked to justify your decisions, not only to the youth, which a lot of times happens as you're going. So if you're judging a breeding class of rabbits, a lot of times you might be providing comments as you judge each individual rabbit to that exhibitor. But a lot of times you're asked to justify your decision over the microphone to the audience at large. Sometimes this can be a little intimidating, but I suggest a few tips here. So educate the audience. So if you get time on the microphone, how can you make, briefly, how can you make the information that you're going to provide useful to everybody in the audience? So I typically like to start out with, what is one or two things that I am looking for in this class, whether that's specific breed characteristics, whether it's a market class, and here are the things that make a good market rabbit. In showmanship, a lot of times I'll ask, what sorts of information would I expect kids at this age to know based on the questions that I ask them following their presentation. Confident in your delivery of placings. So my rule here is that when you place a class, no matter what that class is, you've made one kid really happy and you made the rest of them really mad. Maybe you say you made the first 5 if you place 5 really happy and the rest are mad. But the reality is you've placed a class in a competition with youth, and so now you have a winner, and then you have lots of what we consider non-winners because they weren't first place or they weren't in the top 5 placings. And so just being confident in your delivery of those placings and your reasons for why you placed the class that way, you need to understand judging a competition is just your opinion, and that opinion could change if somebody different was put in that ring in your place tomorrow with the same kids and the same set of rabbits. Making sure that you have a rationale for how you place the class goes a long way in being able to explain any placings that you might get questioned over by parents after the show. Project and show differences. So here you'll see a few, these are Ohio resource, well, 3 of these are Ohio project books, just to kind of give you a sense of the difference in those projects, and we'll go into those in detail. The standard of perfection there is the current standard provided by the American Rabbit Breeders Association, and we'll talk about how that applies. So in showmanship, presentation, roughly 4 minutes per kid. I know in Nebraska, you're not allowed to go over 4 minutes, so 4 minutes or less. That presentation is something that kids practice. In other states, we also call it an examination, but the idea is the same. We want kids to be able to handle that rabbit. We want kids to tell us what sorts of things they're checking on that rabbit. That includes flipping that rabbit over. And what sorts of information can they tell us about why they're checking certain things on that rabbit as they're doing their presentation. Your role in those 4 minutes is just to observe, come up with a scoring system on your own. Everybody does it a little bit different, but you want to be able to make sure that at the end of the showmanship class, that you have some way, you've had some way to score that presentation so that you can discern who's first, who's 5th, and who may be 10th in a class. After that 4 minutes, then we move to knowledge questions. And sometimes this is where judges can get a little nervous because they're not sure what questions to ask, what questions are appropriate. And so one of my suggestions here is just to dig a little deeper on the items they mentioned in their presentation. So for example, if a kid mentions that they're checking for toenails on the front feet and they're looking for 4 toes plus a dew claw, so 5 total toenails on the front feet, and then they move on, maybe one of your questions is there anything else you can check for? So is it good enough that they just have 5 toenails, or are there other things we should be looking for on that front foot? So that's just one example of one way you can dig a little deeper with some knowledge questions based on the information that the youth provided you during the presentation stage. I also expect for experienced members or kids that have several years of experience showing rabbits that they ought to be really good at the presentation, right? They ought to be able to give me lots of detail. They ought to be very efficient in examining that rabbit, turning that rabbit over, giving me lots of details about what they're checking, and doing that with not a lot of trouble. So then I look at knowledge questions as a way for me to dig deeper and really say, okay, what do you know about the rabbit project beyond your ability to provide a presentation. So if you've done that presentation for 6, 7, 8 years, you're probably really good at it. So what else do you know about this project that I want to delve from you? So things like diseases, breeds, disqualifications, terminology of um, rabbit husbandry, those sorts of things can be additional questions that you can draw from to separate first and second in those advanced showmanship classes. I would say one more thing about handling. So that presentation, if you're familiar with other livestock species, I relate that to the way that we judge kids moving their steer around the ring or driving their hog around the ring. So that examination and presentation is really the handling aspect that we see in a lot of other larger livestock expeditions. Market, breeding, and pet. So if you're judging market rabbits, the pointer I would say here is that we're looking for muscling. So what is the muscling consistency of the carcass that you can feel under that pelt or that fur? There are 3 main meat cuts in a market rabbit. So we have some front legs or front forequarters. We have the loin, so that comes from the back of the rib cage to where it connects into those hind legs. So really 3 pieces of the carcass that we're trying to evaluate physically with our hands when we feel that rabbit. I would say in market classes, if you're showing pins of 2 or pins of 3, once you've determined the value of front legs, loin, and hind legs on those rabbits, then you kind of compare all 3 and see how similar are they. Okay, so if we have a pin of 3, the idea would be that we have 3 rabbits that really excel in width and depth of front legs, loin, and hind legs, and then all 3 of those will look exactly alike, so they match up really well. In the breeding project, there are 49 recognized breeds by the American Rabbit Breeders Association currently here in 2020. There's a standard of perfection, which I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. That describes um, the ideal rabbit for each breed. So every breed's a little bit different. So you're going to want to familiarize this yourself with those standards of that standard of perfection, and then probably have a copy if you do very much judging of breeding rabbits at the county fair level. And then the pet rabbit project. Each state, this is a little bit different. Pet rabbits, typically we're looking at body and fur condition, and then we're looking at how that rabbit interacts with the owner and what information and knowledge that owner has about the rabbit. So this is really a companion project. So when you think about your companion as a dog or cat, the pet rabbit project really is a rabbit project where that pet is a companion to the owner. So in the pet project, a lot of times we have rabbits that are multiple breeds, rabbits that have disqualifications, or things that would not allow them to participate in the breeding show. But in their own right are a great project for kids to learn more about the species of rabbit. Here are some resources that you might access. So I mentioned American Rabbit Breeders Association. A couple other things that are available that I've developed here in Ohio that might be helpful. Rabbit Basics for the Beginner is sort of a general overview that we provided for 4-H members that had never had a rabbit project before. So what do you need to know? Again, a great place that you could pull out some questions if you want to for those younger showmanship classes that are very basic information in a 2 or 3 page format. Rabbit Showmanship, breaking it down, is really a 2-page document, and it kind of breaks down based on the age of the kid what sorts of information we might expect them to know about their rabbits, so that we're not trying to be too advanced. Sometimes it just kind of depends on the kids in the class and how it shakes out. So you might have a class of really kids that are really on top of things and really excelled, and you might have to ramp up your questions a little bit. But this is sort of a starting, prepare yourself for showmanship. What are some things I would expect kids between 9 and 11 to know and relay to me about their project? So I would like to sort of wrap up and just say, remember that you're making a positive impact on building life skills among tomorrow's leaders through your dedication and time as a judge at the county fair. So you're being paid for a job, but we also want that to be a great positive experience for those youth that are participating in the county fair rabbit show. And I would say we appreciate all of your time. You're as somebody that works in a county office as well and is hiring judges on a yearly basis. I always enjoy the judges that really do a good job interacting with the kids and educating those kids so that they're advancing in that project from year to year. If you have questions, um, go ahead and you're more than welcome to give me a call at the office number there. There's also my email. Um, email is the quickest way for you to get a response from me because I tend to check that no matter where I'm at. If you're interested in the PowerPoint, I'm more than willing to provide you the PowerPoint with the narrative attached in the notes section. Just send me an email and I am more than willing to share that, and you're able to use that if you want to use it in some other way within your network of judges or within um, colleagues that you might have from other states that are also judging county fairs in other states. So I appreciate your time. And again, thank you for your service. And hopefully 2020 is a successful year for you judging rabbits at county fairs.